On the morning of the 15th of November, 1886, a young schoolmistress set a small iced cake upon our breakfast table and told Sherlock Holmes that 11 families in one Bermondsey Street had spent the previous evening celebrating the birthday of a child who was never born. "Ellen Sowerby," she said, "9 years old yesterday. There is no birth in the register, no baptism at St. Olave's, no death, no burial anywhere in the parish. I have looked. I have spent 3 weeks looking. She is not in the census of 81, she is not on my school roll, and no one in Corvey Row has seen her in 4 years. Yet last night 11 windows had a cake in them, and 11 candles were lit at 7 o'clock exactly, and blown out again within the minute." Holmes had risen from his chair. "Within the minute, Miss Lister?" "They agree upon that. 7 o'clock. It is the hour she was born." "And the 11th household?" "Mine is the 12th house. I lodge there. I have lived in that street since Easter, and until last month I supposed the child to be somebody's invalid daughter sent to the country for her chest. Miss Rhoda Lister was perhaps 25, plainly dressed, with the steady grey stare of a woman who spends her days among 60 children and is not easily hurried. There is worse. On the second Monday of every November my pupils write her a birthday letter. Every child in Corvey Row, and some from the streets beyond. Dear Ellen, I hope you are better. We remember you. 9 years of letters, and a gentleman comes to collect them." "Comes to collect them," repeated Holmes. "You have seen him?" "Once, in 85, before I understood. He is called the visitor. He gives 6pence to each child who writes." Holmes sat down again very slowly and drew the little cake towards him. "Watson, be so good as to hand me the lens." The cake was no larger than a saucer, iced white, with a scalloped rim. He turned it, examined its underside, and scraped a thread of the icing onto his thumbnail. "Made in a tin of pressed steel, with a fault in the seam," he said. "The fault has printed itself upon the cake, here, as a ridge. Miss Lister, if I were to visit the other 10 houses this morning, should I find 10 cakes with the same ridge? I do not know. They are eaten by now. Then we shall hope for crumbs." He held up the candle end. "This candle has burned for less than a minute, as you say, and it is not a household candle. It is a wax taper of the sort sold by the gross for church use. 11 poor families do not all keep church tapers in a drawer." He looked up. "Somebody supplies this street. Somebody has supplied it for 9 years. Miss Lister, what happens on the 27th of this month?" She stared. "I have no idea." "Why?" "Because a thing which has been done quietly for 9 years does not become interesting to a schoolmistress by accident. Something has changed. You said you began to look 3 weeks ago. What made you look?" "A summons," she said. "Not to me. To Mrs. Regg at number 4. She showed it to me because she cannot read. It requires her to attend at Lincoln's Inn on the 27th of November to be examined upon oath concerning the infant Ellen Sauerby. 7 of the 11 have had one." "Ah," said Holmes, and the sound of it was almost affectionate. "There, Watson, is our case. A child who does not exist has been given a birthday for 9 years by 11 honest families, and in 12 days those 11 families will swear to her in a court of law." He was already reaching for his coat. "The question is not who invented her, the question is who requires her to be believed in." Corvey Row lay behind Snowsfields, a short brick terrace of 12 houses backing onto a tannery yard, so that the air had in it always the sweetish rot of hides and lime. It was a poor street, but not a squalid one. The steps were whitened. The windows had curtains. "That is the first thing," said Holmes, standing at the corner in the fog. This street is cleaner than the street it stands in. Note the doors, Watson. Repainted, and recently. We began at number 4. Mrs. Ragg was a stout, anxious woman with reddened forearms, and she talked willingly, which is a mercy in a witness and a danger in a case. Yes, they kept Ellen's birthday. They had always kept it since before her Alfred was born. It was a kindness, wasn't it? For a poor, sick child in the country who had no mother. The cakes came on the morning of the 14th, in a basket from Kites in Long Lane, and there was a card with each, printed lovely, and a shilling for the family. And you lit the candle at 7, and you said her name. You have seen the child? Holmes asked. Twice. She came to the Christmas treat at the mission in 82. Little pale thing, brown eyes like a spaniel, sat on my knee for the magic lantern, and again at the school outing, 85, to Chislehurst. Describe her at Chislehurst. Grown a deal, grey-eyed, nice little manners. She ate her bun with her left hand, I remember, because my Alfred is left-handed, and I said to her, "You and he are a pair." Out in the street again, Holmes said nothing for 100 yards. Then, a brown-eyed child in 82 and a grey-eyed child in 85. Eyes do not change, Watson. Left-handedness does not arrive at 7 years old. 2 different girls. At the least, 2. Hired for an afternoon, dressed, coached and shown. It is cheaper than one girl, and safer, for a girl of 9 remembers what she has been made to do, and a girl of 6 does not. He stopped at the tannery wall. But observe how little was needed. 2 appearances in 9 years and a cake in a window. From that, 11 people have built a child. They have given her a chess complaint, a country, manners, a spaniel's eyes. Memory is the cheapest thing in London and the most valuable in a court. We spent 5 hours in Corvey Row, and I will not set down all of it. Holmes examined 7 kitchens, 3 dustbins, and a great deal of crockery. In the bin at number 9 he found the paper collar of a cake, and in the bin at number 11 the same, and both bore the pressed ridge from the faulty tin. Every cake in the street had come out of one oven. At Kites in Long Lane the answer took 4 minutes. The order was a standing one, entered in 1878 in a ledger that had been rebound twice. 11 cakes, 14th of November, delivered to the Row, paid quarterly by cheque from the office of Frere and Nettleton, solicitors of Bevis Marks. Mr. Kite had never questioned it. It was the oldest account he had. Now the cards, said Holmes. The cards were the finest thing we found that day. Mrs. Lanyon at number 7 had kept every one of hers in the family Bible. 9 cards, 1 for each year, each with a printed border of forget-me-nots, each bearing a printed line. Ellen Sowerby. This day 4 years old. Ellen Sowerby, this day 7 years old. Holmes spread them upon the table under the window and bent over them with his lens for a long time. They were all printed together, he said at last. Every one, 9 years ago. How can you know that? The letter E. Look at it, Watson. In every card, in every year, the crossbar of the small E is broken at the left. A type sort wears. It does not wear identically for 9 successive years. And here, he turned a card to the light, the paper. The card of 1880 is foxed at the edge exactly as the card of 1886 is foxed, and they have lain in the same Bible for different lengths of time. No, these were struck off in one run, in 1 week, by one press, and stored. He straightened. Consider what that means. In the winter of 1877 or 8, a man sat down and ordered 9 years of birthdays in advance. He planned 9 years ahead, I said. He planned an entire childhood. Holmes was already gathering the cards. Mrs. Lanyon, I shall return these. One more question. Your rent. The woman looked frightened for the first time. We're not behind. I do not doubt it. What do you pay? 6 and 6 the week? And your sister in Weston Street? In a house of the same size? 8 and 6, she said reluctantly. We've been lucky. All the row's been lucky since I came. Outside the lamps were being lit. Holmes stood in the middle of the road and looked from end to end of Corvey Row, at the whitened steps and the fresh doors. 2 shillings a week, he said. 11 houses, 9 years, somewhere between £500 and £600, Watson, spent upon the goodwill of people who do not know they have been bought. And not one of them is dishonest. That is the beauty of it. Ask them on oath whether they were ever paid to remember Ellen Sowerby, and everyone will say no, and everyone will be telling the truth. We came home to find a card upon the table, and a gentleman in the basket chair. Julian Frere, he said, rising, of Frere and Nettleton. I understand, Mr. Holmes, that you have spent the day in Corvey Row asking after my ward. He was a man of 50, spare and neat, with a long, clean-shaven upper lip and hands that were noticeably fine. His clothes were good and quiet. He had the trick, which I have seen in the best of his profession, of appearing to have all the time in the world while never wasting a second of it. Your ward, said Holmes. Ellen Sauerby, the natural daughter of the late Gideon Marle, shipbroker of Rotherhithe. Mr. Marle died on the 19th of November, 1877, 3 days after making a will in which he acknowledged the child, left her the residue of his estate, some £34,000, and appointed me her guardian and trustee. He said it as a man recites a thing he has said many times. I have come to you, sir, because I am in difficulty, and because I would rather you were engaged by me than against me. That is candid. It is prudent. There is an application in Chancery. My co-trustee died in the spring. The Union Bank has come in his place, and the bank's solicitors have taken a most disagreeable line. They say there is no evidence that the child is living. They say there is no evidence that she was ever born, since her birth was never registered as, God help us, half the births in Bermondsey were not. In 77, they have obtained an order that the matter be examined before Master Ferron on the 27th, and they have summoned the neighbours. And you? I shall produce the child, said Frere. Naturally, but I would like her existence proved by somebody the world believes. He smiled a small, dry smile. You have a reputation for being difficult to deceive, Mr. Holmes. If you were to satisfy yourself, and say so, it would be worth more to me than 100 affidavits. When he had gone, Holmes stood at the window and watched him take a cab. Well, I said. He has just committed the only error of a very careful man, said Holmes. He has explained too much before he was asked. I said nothing of a will, nothing of Chancery, nothing of the 27th. He told me all three within a minute, and dressed them as a confidence. He turned. But we shall take his money, Watson, because a man's money buys us his papers. The papers came next morning by clerk, and they were, so far as they went, entirely in order. The will of Gideon Marle, dated the 16th of November 1877, 2 days after the child's birth. Everything to my daughter Ellen, called Sowerby, born of Hester Pike, on her attaining the age of 21, with 400 a year to be paid meanwhile to her guardian for her maintenance and education. 9 years of accounts in a beautiful clerkly hand. Schooling, sea air, a doctor at Broadstairs and a governess in Kent. 400 a year for 9 years, I said. £3,600. Yes, and that is not the whole of it. Holmes had the estate accounts spread on the floor and was crawling among them. Here, in 1879 the trustees purchased, for the benefit of the infant, 12 leasehold houses in Bermondsey at £1,900, rents to be received for her. The rents received, Watson, are entered at £41 a year. He looked up. 12 houses at 6 and 6 a week should bring in above 200. He is taking the difference. He is doing something better than taking it. He is paying it back to the tenants as a discount and buying with it the only commodity his fraud requires. Holmes sat back on his heels. The 12 houses are Corvée Row. He owns the street. He is landlord to every witness who will be sworn on the 27th. That, I confess, chilled me more than anything we had yet found. 11 families who could be turned into the November street by a letter. Then it is simple, I said. There is no child. He has drawn 400 a year for 9 years for a child who died or who never lived, and now the bank has caught him and he must produce a girl or be ruined. That is the shape of it, said Holmes. It is not the size of it. He got to his feet and stood looking down at the accounts with a curious expression. Consider, Watson. To steal 400 a year, a man needs a lie and a nerve. He does not need 11 families. He does not need 9 years of cakes. He does not need 60 children to write letters, nor 2 hired girls, nor a photographer. A photographer? Mrs. Lanyon has a portrait on her mantel, said Holmes, of a child of 7, and so has Mrs. Wragge, and it is the same portrait, which is our business this afternoon. Before we could reach Tooley Street, however, Scotland Yard reached us, in the person of Inspector Tobias Greggson, who came up the stairs 2 at a time with the light of certainty in his eye. Corvée Row, said he. You'll have heard of it. Nastiest little swindle I've come across in years, and it's ours, Mr. Holmes, not the Chancery's. Enlighten me. Burial clubs. Greggson sat down with satisfaction. 11 families all swearing to a child that doesn't exist. Why? Because you can insure a child in a burial club for £1 a quarter, and there's clubs that'll pay £3.10 on a death, and a family can be in 6 clubs at once, invent a child, keep her alive 9 years in the neighbours' minds so there's plenty to swear to her, then bury her and collect from the lot. There's been a dozen such cases in Liverpool. An excellent theory, said Holmes gravely. It has only one weakness. Money. Money? In your theory, the money runs from the families outward in premiums. In Corvée Row, the money runs inward. They are paid £1 a year, given a cake, and charged 2 shillings a week less than the market rent. No one insures a child at a profit of £500 outlay. Gregson's jaw set. Then they're being used by somebody who takes the shares. Either way, they're in it. I've taken Tibbet the lamplighter this morning on suspicion, and I don't doubt he'll talk by tomorrow. I saw Holmes's hand close on the back of his chair. That was a mistake. It was an arrest. It was a mistake, Greggson, and you will see it before the week is out. You have just told 11 frightened people that speaking about Ellen Sowerby leads to a cell. You have shut every mouth in that street 12 days before they are to be examined. He spoke without heat, which was worse than heat. And you have done precisely what the man who built this thing would have paid you to do. It took 2 days to undo. Tibbet was released on the Thursday, having said nothing, since he knew nothing. But Corvée Row had learned its lesson, and when we walked its length again, the curtains twitched and no door opened. Miss Lister told us that Mrs. Wragge had wept in her kitchen and said she would tell the gentlemen at Lincoln's Inn whatever they wished to hear, so long as it was over. So we lose the street, said Holmes, and we gain a fact. Gregson's theory is wrong, but it has told us what a jury will do with these people. They will believe them. 11 honest witnesses, 9 years of consistent memory, 60 children's letters in a bound volume. No master in Chancery who ever lived would find against that on the strength of an empty register. Half the poor of London are missing from the registers. Then how is it to be broken? By understanding why it was built so large. He stopped under a lamp. Watson, I have been slow. I have been treating the birthdays as concealment. They are not concealment. They are construction. A forger of documents makes one paper, and one paper can be examined. This man declined to forge a single sheet. He forged a memory in 11 households, in cake and candle wax and children's handwriting, and he began it in the first winter, before anybody suspected anything, because he knew that a memory must be 9 years old before it is worth anything. He knew in 78 that he would one day be challenged. He knew in 78 that a child who does not exist cannot go on forever, and he provided for the end as carefully as for the beginning. Holmes turned to me. "I have seen the end, Watson. It has been on Mrs. Lanyon's table since Tuesday, and I have been too stupid to read it." We went back that night, and Mrs. Lanyon, being the one soul in the street with more curiosity than fear, let us in. Holmes asked her for the Bible again, and turned the 9 cards out on the cloth, and then he shook the Bible gently, and a 10th card fell out from between the leaves at the back. It was of the same size and the same paper. It had no forget-me-nots. It had a black border 1/4 of an inch wide, and it was printed with a small broken cross-barred E, and it read, "In loving memory of Ellen Sowerby, who fell asleep." And after that, nothing. A blank rule where a date should be. "It come with the first lot," said Mrs. Lanyon, staring. "9 year ago, there was a paper said, 'Keep this by in case, poor lamb.' I never looked at it since." Out in the fog, Holmes walked very fast and said nothing for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was quite flat. In the winter of 1877, when he ordered 9 years of birthdays, he also ordered her death card, and left the date open. He has always known that she would die when she became inconvenient, and she has become inconvenient on the 27th of this month. "But if she does not exist, then some child must," said Holmes. "You cannot produce a corpse of a girl who is nothing but a name, but you can produce a certificate, and to obtain a certificate, you must produce a doctor, and to satisfy a doctor at short notice a prudent man does not rely on air. Watson, there is a child somewhere in London tonight who has been taught that her name is Ellen Sowerby. She was worth 400 a year while she was alive. On the 27th she becomes worth a great deal more dead." Tooley Street took us the next morning to Mr. Pilbeam, photographer, whose window was full of brides going brown in the light, and whose backdrop, a balustrade with a painted urn and a curtain looped at the left, was the very balustrade behind the little grey-eyed girl on Mrs. Lanyon's mantel. Pilbeam was a small, damp man who kept his day books in a chest and his negatives in racks in a shed at the back, because glass is heavy and he had once had a floor come down. "Ellen Sowerby," he said, running his finger down the book for 1884. "Here, 14th of October, 12 carte de visite, paid cash, order taken by a gentleman. I've the plate, if the rats haven't had the label off it." "You photographed a girl," said Holmes. "You did not photograph a name. Who brought her?" "A gentleman and a nurse. She was a nice enough little thing. Wouldn't smile." "Had you seen the nurse before?" "I'd seen her twice," said Pilbeam, with the first flicker of shrewdness. "She brings 'em. Children, for cards. Mrs. Coyne, out Deptford way. She keeps a house for infants." Holmes stood quite still, and then in a different voice altogether he said, "Mr. Pilbeam, how far back do your books go?" 71, my father's before that." "Then be so good as to find me the autumn of 1877, November, and in particular, sir, any entry of an infant." He found it in 11 minutes, and I have not forgotten the sound of his voice reading it out in that stale little shop. 26 November 1877. 1 plate, infant deceased, aged 11 days. 2 prints, paid 4 shillings and 6 pence. Name, Pike. Holmes did not speak. He held out his hand, and Pilbeam, thoroughly frightened now, took us through into the shed, and after 20 minutes among the racks brought out a plate wrapped in newspaper, with its label still gummed to the corner in his father's hand. Even reversed in the glass, one could make out what it was. A very small child laid on a shawl, with its eyes closed and its hands crossed by somebody who had taken great pains, and beside it, out of focus, the hem of a woman's dress and one hand that had not been able to let go. "Hester Pike," said Holmes at last, "the mother named in the will. The child was born on the 14th of November, 1877. Gideon Marle died on the 19th, having left her everything. And on the 25th, at 11 days old, she died 6 days after her father and her mother, who had not the price of a burial, had her photographed instead. I found that I had to sit down on Pilbeam's stool. Then the estate, I said, the estate vested in the child, and when she died, an illegitimate child in the law of England has no kindred, said Holmes. She had no father-in-law, no mother-in-law, no cousins. Dying at 11 days old, intestate, with £34,000, she left it to the Crown. Nothing to Mr. Frere, nothing to anyone at all. He wrapped the plate again with extreme care. And so Mr. Frere did the only profitable thing. He kept her alive. Not for a legacy, he can never have the capital. For an income, £400 a year, and the rents of 12 houses, and the management of £34,000 for as long as she could be made to live. 21 years of it, if he could last so long. And now he cannot last. So she dies, the accounts close, the Crown claims what is left, and everybody's attention goes to the Treasury solicitor and away from the Guardian. Holmes took up the plate. There is only one person in London who can destroy him, Watson, and she has kept silence for 9 years, and I very much fear that he has known where she is the whole time. We found Hester Loach, who had been Hester Pike, in a laundry off Weston Street, ironing shirts in a heat that made the windows run. She was perhaps 32 and looked 50. When Holmes said the name Pike, she put the iron down on its heel, very carefully, as a woman does who has burned things by being startled. She would not talk there. We took her to a coffee house, and she sat with her hands round the cup and told us, in a low, flat voice, the thing she had never told anyone. She had been Marle's servant. She had been sent to lie in at Corvey Row, at number 9, with a midwife named Salis, because it was quiet and cheap. The child was born at 7 in the evening on the 14th. On the 17th, Mr. Frere had come, the master's lawyer, and had written down the hour of the birth and the name of the midwife in a little book, and had told her the master had made his will, and the baby was provided for, and she was not to worry. On the 19th, the master died. On the 25th, the baby died in the night, of nothing at all. She had simply stopped, as they do. And I hadn't registered her, said Hester. You've 42 days for a birth, and I'd been ill, and it wasn't done. So there she was, dead, and never been born. And I went to Mr. Frere because I didn't know who else. And what did Mr. Frere tell you? Said Holmes. He told me it was concealment of a birth. Her mouth twisted. He said they hang for less or transport you. He said, you have not registered her living, and now you will register her dead, and they will say you did away with her, and there'll be a coroner, and you'll go to prison, and I cannot save you. He said, let it be. He said, I will see her decent. She looked up. She's in a coffin at Nunhead with a Mrs. Bowyer that died the same week. 6pence to the man, and he gave me £12. You took it, I said, and I'm ashamed of how it came out. I took it, she said. I've never spent it. It's under the boards where I lodge. 12 sovereigns in a tobacco tin, and if you dig it up, you'll find they're the same 12 because I marked them. She looked at me with a kind of exhausted defiance. You'll think, why didn't she speak? When the cake started. I did think of it. Then I thought, they'll ask why I never spoke before, and there's the £12 and there's the coffin at Nunhead with 2 in it. So I moved into Weston Street where I could hear the Row on a still night. And every 14th of November I put a candle in my window at 7 and I don't light it. Her voice did not rise at all. It'd be a lie to light it. She never had a birthday. She had 11 days. Nobody said anything for a while. The urn hissed behind the counter. "Mrs. Loach," said Holmes gently, "did you know that the child in the will is to be produced in court on the 27th? I heard the Row talking." Her hands began to shake at last. "Sir, who is she? 9 years I've heard them singing over the wall to my Ellen. Who's the child they'll bring?" "That," said Holmes, "is the question I intend to answer before Friday. There is a kind of investigation which proceeds by ledgers, and there is a kind which proceeds by boots. The next 4 days were boots. Holmes went to Deptford in the character of a man seeking a home for an unwanted infant, and came back with the intelligence that Mrs. Coyne's house in Prince Street held 9 children, 2 of whom were not infants at all, a boy of 6 and a girl of about 11 who did not go out, who was called Nell, and who was said by the neighbours to be the lady's daughter, and to be delicate. 11, I said, but the child in the will is 9. 11 is a difficulty, said Holmes, and I imagine it is the reason for the black-bordered card. A hired girl of 6 can be shown at a mission treat, and no one measures her. A girl who must be examined by a master in Chancery is another matter. Nell has grown out of the part. That is Frere's whole predicament, Watson, and it is why 9 years of preparation must now be spent in a fortnight. He cannot go on. He can only end. Meanwhile, Greggson, to his credit, had turned. He came to Baker Street on the Tuesday with his hat in his hand and said, in the manner of a man swallowing physic, that there were no burial club policies on any child in Corvey Row, that he had spent a day at Somerset House, and that he was at Holmes's disposal so far as the law allowed. "The law will allow a good deal on Friday," said Holmes, "if we can survive until Friday. Inspector, I want a man on Mrs. Coyne's house at Deptford day and night who will note every arrival and follow any child who leaves it, and I want the sailing list for the Cape and the plate for the next 10 days. That evening we lost Pilbeam. Holmes had taken the plate away with him, which saved everything. But when we went to Tooley Street on the Wednesday to have the photographer's statement taken down and sworn, the shop was shut, the shed had been cleared of every negative earlier than 1880, and a neighbour told us that Mr. Pilbeam had come into money from a brother in Antwerp, and had gone across on the night boat. £60 and a passage, said Holmes, standing in the empty shed among the straw. He is not dead, Watson. He is bought. Frere does not kill where money will do, but our witness is gone, and a photograph without the man who made it is a picture of nobody's baby. Worse followed within the hour. Miss Lister met us at the corner of Weston Street, with her bonnet crooked and her face white. "They have taken Hester Loach," she said, "this morning. 2 men in a fly. They said it was for her health." The house where she lodged had been turned out. The boards were up and the tobacco tin was gone. The landlady, weeping, produced a paper she had been given and could not read. I read it, and my hands were unsteady with rage before I reached the bottom. It was a reception order and a medical certificate under the Lunacy Acts for the reception of Hester Loach, laundress, into Fairholt House, a licensed private asylum at Chiswick, upon the ground of delusions. The certificate stated that the said Hester Loach persistently declared that a living child known to many persons was dead and buried, and had been observed to place lighted candles in her window and to address them. It was signed by one Dr. Arthur Kemp of Camberwell, and countersigned by the proprietor of Fairholt House. 2 signatures, said Holmes. Perfectly regular and perfectly ruinous. Do you see the elegance of it, Watson? He has not silenced her. He has published her. Every word she would say on Friday is now written in a lunacy certificate as the substance of her madness. If she stands up in Lincoln's Inn and says my child died in 77, she says it as a certified lunatic who says exactly that. It is monstrous. It is craftsmanship. He struck his stick against the curb, and I cannot break it by argument. I can only break it by the certificate's own faults. You are a medical man. Read it again. I read it 3 times, and the 3rd time I found it. The date, I said. He certifies that he personally examined her at her residence in Weston Street on the 11th of November. Holmes, on the 11th of November she was in the laundry. We know she works 6 until 8, and more than that. Look here. The certificate describes her as having a child's photograph upon the wall of her room. She has no photograph. She never had one. Pilbeam made 2 prints in 77, and Frere took them both. She told us so. She said she has nothing of her at all, not so much as a lock because she was afraid to keep it. Holmes took the paper from me, and for the first time in a week he smiled. Kemp has never seen the room, he said. He has certified from Frere's dictation, and Frere, being a man who plans, told him what ought to be there. Watson, that is a criminal offence and a professional death sentence, and Dr. Kemp is going to discover it from you tomorrow morning, at his own breakfast table, in the presence of Inspector Greggson. We had 3 days. I will set down only what mattered. Dr. Arthur Kemp proved to be a young man with an old man's debts, and he did not last 10 minutes. He had signed for 20 guineas. He had never entered Weston Street. By Thursday noon he had made a statement, and the commissioners in lunacy, who move slowly in most things but very fast indeed, when a licensed house has taken in a sane woman on a false certificate, had ordered Hester Loach's discharge, but the machinery of her release would not turn before Friday morning, and Fairholt House stood 2 hours away at Chiswick. That was the first thing. The second was the trap, and it was Holmes's, and it was built out of nothing but a date. On the Wednesday evening he sat down and drafted for the Union Bank's solicitors a short statement of the case which they were to serve upon Frere as the points to be proved at the examination. It was 3 pages of dull, exact lawyer's prose, and in the first paragraph, where it recited the birth of the infant, it said, "Born on the 3rd day of December, 1877, at Corvey Row, Bermondsey." "But she was born on the 14th of November, I said. She was, and there is not one scrap of paper in the world which says so. Holmes laid down his pen. No register, no baptism, no doctor's book. Marl's will names her but gives no date. Frere's accounts give no date. The cakes and the cards give an age, but never a day. The neighbours know the 14th because they were told the 14th, and if the bank's own solicitors now say the 3rd of December, the neighbours will fold up like paper. They will say, "Well, sir, I always understood it was November, but the gentleman will know best." I began to see it, but Frere cannot let it stand. Frere cannot let it stand for a moment. His entire structure is built upon the 14th. 9 cards, 9 cakes, 60 children's letters every second Monday of November. If the child's birthday is in December, then his 9 years of memory belong to some other child, and every witness he has cultivated becomes a witness against him. Holmes folded the paper. He must correct it. And when he corrects it, Watson, I shall ask him one question. How does a man know the day of a birth that was never registered? Of a child he says he never saw born, whose mother he says he has not spoken with since 78. He will say the mother told him. He will, and then he will have admitted that the certified lunatic of Chiswick is the source of his own certainty, and either she is truthful or he is a liar, and he cannot have it both ways in the same breath. Holmes rose and stood by the fire. It is not a hammer, Watson. It is a wedge. But it is 9 years thick where it matters. The correction came on the Thursday afternoon, by hand, from Bevis Marks, a letter of 6 lines in Frere's own writing, regretting an error in the bank's statement, and requiring that the date of birth be amended to the 14th of November, 1877, as the deponent would depose. Holmes read it and put it in his pocketbook, and said only, "Now we must hope he does not run." He did not run. He did something considerably worse, and he did it at 8 o'clock on the morning of Friday the 27th of November, which was the 9th anniversary, though I did not think of it until afterwards, of the day a baby was carried in another woman's coffin to Nunhead. The note came up with the coffee. It was addressed to Holmes in the same fine hand, and it said, "Sir, it is my painful duty to inform you, and I have this hour informed Master Ferrand and the bank, that my ward Ellen Sowerby died at 5:30 this morning at the house of her nurse in Deptford of diphtheria, after an illness of 3 days. The certificate of Dr. A. Kemp is with the registrar. In these circumstances the examination can serve no purpose, and I shall apply for it to be discharged. J. Frere." Holmes was out of the room before I had finished it, and shouting for a cab from the landing. "Kemp," I said on the stairs. "Kemp is ruined. He signed a statement yesterday. Frere does not know that. Kemp has not dared tell him." Holmes flung himself into the hansom. "Deptford, Prince Street. Drive as if the horse were insured." I have been in some ugly hurries in my life. That was the worst because of what we expected to find. It was a raw, yellow morning, and the traffic on the Jamaica Road was solid with brewers' drays, and Holmes sat forward the whole way with his hands on his knees, and once he said, 9 years to build her, and 1 night to bury her, and nothing else. Greggson's man was at the corner of Prince Street, and he came off the wall at a run. "Cab left 4 minutes ago, sir. Growler, Mrs. Coyne and a child, and a man in a grey ulster driving with the cabman. Child was carried out wrapped in a blanket. Gravesend Road." "Alive?" "Couldn't say, sir. Didn't move." We caught them on the Deptford Broadway, where a coal wagon had shed a wheel and stopped the whole street, and the growler was standing forth in the block with its blinds down. Holmes had the door open before our own cab had halted. I went in after him and found Mrs. Coyne, a broad, respectable-looking woman, in a bonnet with her arms round a bundle on the seat, and the man in the ulster half out of the far door with Gregson's constable's hand on his collar. The bundle was a girl. She was warm. She was not dead. She was breathing 6 times in the minute, and her pupils were the size of pinheads, and the smell on her breath was the smell that any surgeon of my generation knows before he is fully awake. "Laudanum," I said. "A great deal of it. Out of the cab, ma'am, and give me room." I will not describe what followed on the pavement outside a Deptford ironmonger's, with a crowd of 40 people and a policeman holding my coat. It is not pretty work, and it is very simple work, and by 9 o'clock she was retching and weeping and holding onto my sleeve with both hands, which is the most beautiful thing a doctor ever feels. She had brown hair and a thin, watchful face, and when Holmes crouched down and asked her, very quietly, what her name was, she said, without hesitation, "Ellen Sowerby, sir, I'm 9. "How old are you really?" The child's eyes went past him to Mrs. Coyne, who was being walked away between 2 constables, and something in her face broke. "I don't know," she said. "Nobody ever told me." We reached Lincoln's Inn at 10 minutes to 12. I would like to say that we arrived in triumph. In fact, we arrived filthy, with a sick child wrapped in Holmes's ulster, into a quiet, panelled room, where a master in Chancery sat at a table with a shorthand writer, and where Mr. Julian Frere rose with an expression of perfectly judged sorrow to say that he must beg the master's indulgence, as the subject of the inquiry had died that morning. Then he saw the child, and I watched a man's face perform the hardest task it will ever be given, which is to be surprised in front of witnesses without appearing to be. He did it well. He put his hand on the table. "Thank God," he said. "Thank God. There has been some misinformation. Sir, this is my ward." "Is it?" said Holmes. "Certainly it is my ward. I was informed by the nurse an hour ago that she had died in the night. I see now that the woman is a fool, or worse. Sir, I withdraw my note without reserve." The master, who was a small, dry, extremely patient old gentleman, looked at the child and then at me. "Who is this medical man?" "Dr. John Watson," said Holmes. "He is here at the request of the Union Bank, and he has this morning saved the life of the child whose death was certified in Mr. Frere's note of 8 o'clock. Saved her from what? From 40 minims of laudanum and the Gravesend Road. That was the end of any pretence of a quiet morning. When the room had settled, the master turned to me and asked me, on oath, to state the age of the child before him. I had had 2 hours to think about it, and I had spent much of that time doing what any regimental surgeon does at a recruiting table. "Sir, the child in the will was born on the 14th of November, 1877, and would be 9 years and 13 days old today. This child is not 9. She has the full set of her permanent incisors, upper and lower, and both her first permanent molars are long in wear, and with the master's permission her second permanent molars are through the gum on the lower jaw, here and here. That last does not occur at 9. It does not commonly occur before 12. I have examined perhaps 400 children for the army and the parish, and I would put her at 11 at the very least, and I would be prepared to say so anywhere." I hesitated, and then added the thing that mattered more to me. "There is a further point. She has a vaccination mark of 4 insertions on the left arm of the pattern used at the Camberwell station, and a vaccination is registered somewhere. Whoever this child is, sir, she has a certificate of her own with a date upon it. She has simply never been allowed to know it." The shorthand writer's pen scratched on for a moment after I stopped. Frere did not fight it. That was the measure of him. He turned to the master with his hands open, and he made, extempore, the best speech I have ever heard from a criminal. He had been imposed upon. He was a busy man who for 9 years had discharged at a distance a duty laid upon him by a dead client. He had paid for the child's keep. He had visited her twice. He had trusted the woman coin, and he saw with horror that the true child must have died long ago, and that a substitute had been supplied to him to keep the maintenance flowing into that woman's pocket. He would resign the trust today. He would submit his accounts to any scrutiny. He was, he said, an old fool who had been robbed, and if there was blame, he took it. And the terrible thing, Watson, like as it may sound, is that it would have worked. Every fact we had would have fitted it. Mrs. Coyne would go to prison, and Frere would go home. "Master Ferrand," said Holmes, "may I ask Mr. Frere 3 questions?" "You may ask them." Holmes did not stand up, and he did not raise his voice. "Mr. Frere, when did you last speak with Hester Pike, the mother of the child?" "In the spring of 1878. I have not seen her since. I do not know whether she is alive." "Yesterday afternoon you wrote to the bank's solicitors requiring them to amend their statement of claim. They had put the child's birth at the 3rd of December. You corrected it to the 14th of November." Holmes laid the letter upon the table. "That is your hand." "It is." "There is no register of that birth, no baptism, no physician. The will gives no date. Your own accounts give no date. Mrs. Coyne, who supplied the child, is illiterate and has told the inspector this morning that she never knew a birthday and used whatever day she was told." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "How, sir? Do you know the day?" The room was very quiet. Master Ferrand had put down his pen. "It is in my papers," said Frere. "It is in one paper," said Holmes. "A small memorandum book in which on the 17th of November, 1877 you wrote down the hour of the birth and the name of the midwife, at the bedside, 3 days after the event, because you were an exact young man who had a will to draw. 7 in the evening. And the midwife Salis. Will you produce that book?" Frere said nothing at all. "You need not," said Holmes. "The mother remembers you writing it." "The mother," said Frere, and his voice was quite level, "is in a lunatic asylum at Chiswick, certified upon the ground that she believes a living child to be dead. She was discharged at 9 o'clock this morning upon the order of the commissioners in lunacy," said Holmes, "the certificate having been signed by a medical man who never entered her room, who has made a statement to Inspector Greggson, and who described upon oath a photograph hanging on her wall which does not exist and never did, because you took both prints of it in 1877, and you knew what a bereaved mother's room ought to contain, and you could not resist furnishing it." He turned to the door and opened it. Hester Loach came in. She was in the same clothes she had been taken away in, and she had been crying, and she walked past all of us and stopped in front of Frere and looked at him for a long moment, and then she looked at the girl on the bench beside me. The thin, watchful child in a man's ulster, with her hair stuck to her forehead, and it was to the child that she spoke. "You're not her," she said. "God forgive them. You're not her." The rest was procedure, and it took the better part of the winter. The plate from Pilbeam's shed was printed by an expert appointed by the court, and the print was laid before Master Ferrand. An infant of 11 days, dead, on a shawl, with a woman's hand out of focus at the edge. The day-book entry for the 26th of November 1877 was produced, and Pilbeam himself, when it was made clear to him by the Antwerp police that his £60 had bought him a charge of conspiracy, came home and swore to it. The sexton's man at Nunhead was found. He was 71 and remembered the sixpence, and remembered it because he had done it twice in his life and been ashamed of it both times. The coffin of a Mrs. Bowyer, buried the 27th of November 1877, was raised in February, and there were 2 in it, and one of them was very small. Frere was tried at the Old Bailey in the spring, with Mrs. Coyne and Dr. Kemp, upon indictments of conspiracy to defraud, of falsely obtaining a lunacy certificate, and of administering a stupefying drug with intent. He defended himself, as he had begun, with dignity, and he never once admitted anything, and the jury were out for 40 minutes. He got 7 years. Kemp got 18 months and was struck off the register. Mrs. Coyne got 5 years, and Greggson, who had the handling of her house, found that 4 of the 9 children there had no names of any kind, which is a separate story, and a worse one. Of the money there was little joy for anybody. £34,000 had lain 9 years in the hands of a man who was paid to preserve it and needed it never to be claimed. The Treasury solicitor took what remained, and after a long correspondence, which I do not pretend to have followed, a part of it was given to the Seamen's Orphan Fund of Rotherhithe, which Gideon Marle had subscribed to in his lifetime. Corvey Row was sold with the rest of the leaseholds. The new landlord put the rents up 2 shillings, and 3 families went out at Lady Day, and I do not know that any of them ever understood that they had lost the price of their memories. They came, though, to the examination, every one of them. Mrs. Ragg stood up and swore to a brown-eyed child at a magic lantern show in 1882, and then heard that she had held on her knee some 6-year-old from Deptford, whose name nobody had thought to ask, and she sat down and put her apron over her face. Mrs. Lanyon kept her 9 cards. The court did not want them, having the plate. Miss Rhoda Lister gave her evidence in a clear, hard voice, and afterwards went home and burnt, at her own kitchen fire, the bound volume of children's letters which the police had recovered from a shelf in Bevis Marks, labelled in a clerk's hand E.S. Testimonials, 1878 to 1886, and indexed by year. She said she would not have those children grow up and find their handwriting in a lawyer's exhibit. I could not argue with her, though Holmes said it was the most valuable piece of evidence ever destroyed in England, and then said that she was right. The child had no name. That was the part that would not resolve itself, and it is the part I still think about. She had been Nell at Deptford and Ellen everywhere else, and she could remember 2 other houses and 1 other woman, and beyond that, nothing. The vaccination books ran her at last to a station in Camberwell and a date in 1875, and to a mother of 17 who had died the following year at Guy's. The name in the book was Anne Tully. So the girl was 11, as I had said, and had a birthday of her own in the last week of August, and had been keeping somebody else's since she was 6. She was taken, in the end, by Hester Loach. It was not sentiment. The board would not have allowed sentiment. It was Miss Lister's doing, and the parish's, and the guarantee of a small annuity out of the Marle estate for the maintenance of a witness of the court, and it took until June. But in June the 2 of them went into 2 rooms in Weston Street, and Anne Tully, aged 11, began at the board school with 60 children who had spent 9 Novembers writing letters to her. I saw them once more, in the November following, when I had occasion to be in Bermondsey and walked round by the tannery wall out of a sentiment I could not have justified. It was a raw evening, and the fog was low, and Corvey Row was dark. The cakes had stopped, and no window along that whole terrace had anything in it but curtains. At the corner of Weston Street I found the one light. Hester Loach's window was on the ground floor, and there was a candle in it, and beside the candle, propped against the glass in a black frame, a photograph of a very small child asleep on a shawl. The clock at St. Olave's began to strike 7. I stood in the road, and I saw her lean in and touch the match to the wick, and I understood that in 9 years she had never once lit it before. Behind her, the girl, who was not Ellen, said something, and the woman turned, and the 2 of them stood there in the small light, and the street outside stayed dark, and no one sang.